Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Archives and Anchovies, the podcast about whatever it is that I want to talk about that week. So, this week is kind of an interesting week. I had a lot of opportunities to sift through a bunch of things to talk about and really kind of deliberated on what this podcast would be about. And it ended up being probably one of my favorite activities. It's also probably one of the most frustrating things that I do, which is golf. Now, this podcast may not be interesting to everybody because not everybody plays golf, but I do think that golf definitely imitates life in the fact that you have to overcome a lot of adversities. You have to practice at things to get better, and you have to be able to manage emotions and be able to manage the way that you basically manage yourself around the course. So there's a lot of things that go into golf, and it's really a lot of fun when you start to look at it from a more technical standpoint of strategy. So there's the physical aspects of it where you can improve your golf swing and you can do all the things that you need to do to make your swing better. But then there's also a large mental portion of it. And I've recently gotten into several different podcasts and a couple of YouTube channels that talk more about the strategy of the game and your mental approach to the game and how you actually play it. And it's been really eye opening for me to go through and really try to understand what it is that I do that makes me not play golf as well as I would like to, or not only that, just not have as much fun. It's not something that I do for a living. It's something that's a hobby and it's something that's supposed to be fun, but yet I take it sometimes way too seriously and think I should be better than I am. Really stems back to about 25 years ago. I was working for a large company and ended up losing that job. But I got a nice little severance package for it where I had about 90 days worth of income while I was looking for another job. I was in retail at the time. And I ended up getting to befriend a head pro at the one of the local courses. And so I was down there basically hitting balls every day, and he just became my friend, and we ended up getting along really well. He started giving me free lessons, and I told him one of the things I'd like to do maybe is become a PGA professional and teach. I was never going to be good enough to play like on the PGA tour, or at that time it was the Gateway Tour, all these little mini tours. That really wasn't an ambition I would have loved to, but I just didn't have that level of talent. I'd played in high school. I did okay in high school. I was probably the fourth or fifth best person on a 12-man team back in high school. So there's, I think, in the 3 years that I played high school golf, I might have medalist honored once, which means that I was for that tournament in the 9 holes. I was the one that shot the lowest score. So it wasn't something where I was, the best player by any means, but it's always been a passion of mine. It's always been something I've really enjoyed doing. So it made sense that when I started taking lessons from this PGA professional, that we became friends. I got actually down to almost scratch. I think at one point I was like a minus 1.2 handicap. So it means I was only getting a stroke per 9 holes of golf. And what was really neat is I ended up sponsoring him for a couple of US Open qualifying. So I caddied for him and I did the sponsorship. So that was something that was very, very enlightening from the fact that I got to go out and see college kids play, PGA Tour professionals, as far as like the teaching pros or the club pros, and how they hit the ball, their approach to the game, and how they manage themselves. One of the times that I sponsored for him was in New Mexico, and we were on a course in New Mexico, and it was probably 25-mile-an-hour winds. It was just absolutely unbelievable. And one of the holes was, I think, a 620-yard par five, and it was dead into the wind. And just watching these people that do this for a living, especially the college kids, hit these balls and figure out what they needed to do as from a strategy standpoint to manage their way to not shoot a blow up hole was really, really amazing. So the cool thing about being able to caddy at that level and carrying a bag is that you have a lot of conversations, get to listen to a lot of conversations. And I really got into the strategy of the game at that point. And I got down to almost a scratch golfer. I shot under par probably 3 or 4 times in my lifetime. And this is following strict PGA rules. This is not something to where you were you know, with your buddies on a Saturday afternoon, and if your lie is bad, you kick the ball and you improve your lie or something like that. But the thing that it really taught me was that there are a big gap between the way somebody can approach the game at different levels. So it's kind of neat. And this week, primarily golf for me has been, something that has really driven me to become better in the last few years. I stepped away from the game for about 5 or 6 years and really have gotten back into it in the last three, much to the chagrin of my account because yeah, golf is not a cheap sport by any stretch of the imagination. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about today in relation to that was the equipment that's used. And it got me in preparation for today's podcast. It got me into a mode of looking at, the history of golf and also the history of equipment. So I am a person that does a lot of research on equipment, and that includes irons, golf bags, golf shoes, golf balls, especially. And today I thought I would talk a little bit about the history of the golf ball because once I started going into it, I thought it was pretty interesting. Essentially, golf is a game that's, I would say, 700 years old, somewhere in that range. The 1400s is really when it started in Scotland. And it was basically you're hitting a piece of wood with another wood. So the ball at that point was a piece of wood. And they generally just had holes set up that they would knock this piece of wood around. And it looked nothing like the golf balls from today. The evolution of the golf ball then went to a piece of leather that was sewn together and filled with feathers. So that's actually pretty cool. It is thinking about the improvements and how technology has changed things today in our lives, thinking about what they would have thought the first time they hit a leather sack filled with feathers in comparison to them hitting a stone or a piece of wood. So it's kind of like if you have played golf in a while, back in the 90s, there was this cover called Balata. It was super duper soft. I'm in Phoenix, and here in the desert, you couldn't leave your golf balls in your golf bag in the summer because it got too hot. Balata would actually completely disfigures that. That's how soft Balata, as far as from an outside perspective, was, or I should not outside perspective, but from what the outside of the materials were, it would actually deform because of the heat. So you couldn't leave that golf ball sitting in your golf bag in your garage, especially. So I can't imagine what the first time they went from hitting this piece of wood to hitting a leather sack full of feathers probably felt like. It felt like us today hitting a marshmallow with a baseball bat. You probably couldn't even feel it. So that was kind of the next evolution. Of course, I have been to Scotland. I love Scotland. It's one of the places that if I could retire, I would. That is the birthplace of golf. So on the east coast of Scotland is basically where it was done. The hardwoods that they used were things like beech, and in my research, it was something called boxroot. So basically, like I said, you're hitting a piece of wood with another piece of wood, and it probably you got splinters. Obviously wood, when you smack it around, it's going to have big chunks taken out of it and things like that. So it was pretty quickly obsolete, but as pretty quickly is kind of a uh, depending on your timeline. But basically, it was from the 1400s to the 1600s, they used the wood. So it's not like it was just a month or so. If I'm in the United States, so I look at, next year is our 250th anniversary of us being a country. And interestingly enough, if you think of, they used a wooden golf ball for 200 years, that's almost as long as our country's been a country. So it's pretty amazing to think that they smacked a piece of wood around for that long. So the feathery revolution, and it's called, basically sometime in the 1600s, there's a leather sack stuffed with a bunch of boiled goose feathers is pretty much what they used. So They tried other feathers, but goose feathers seemed to be the thing that provided them the best experience for their golf ball. The craftsmanship, basically, what they did is they took wet leather and they shrank it around the expanding feathers. So you imagine a leather worker, they took a piece of leather, they wet it down, and they shoved a bunch of wet goose feathers in there, and they crammed them in as much as they could. As everything dried, the leather actually shrunk while the feathers expanded. So it became pretty much a little, a little piece of, a golf ball is what it ended up being. So the golf ball became a sack that was filled with feathers. They were definitely, not for it was for the royalty at that point because they weren't cheap to be made. They had costs that were involved, and so it was much more expensive than at that time to even buy a golf club. So, talk about wanting to not lose a golf ball. That's something where you definitely don't want to lose those golf balls because at that point they were very, very expensive. So there were a couple of limitations for those. So you had to have a ton of feathers to make a golf ball. So goose feathers, you had to have the right consistency, the right size, the right type. So there's an expense there. And the craftsman at that point in time to actually make a golf ball, from my research, basically they could make only 4 golf balls a day. So if you look at today's manufacturing with all of the major manufacturers, Titleist, TaylorMade, Srixon, all of those types of manufacturers, they made a ton of golf balls, obviously every day. So a lot of these skilled craftsmen that did all of these things by hand, at a maximum capacity, they would make about 4 balls a day. So if you had one of these, you're probably in very rare company. And again, you probably wanted to make sure that you weren't going to be losing them. And, if you think about a piece of leather stuffed with feathers, it's probably not something you're going to make incredibly round. So probably tougher to make round than a piece of wood because you could chisel wood, you could shave wood, you could do things to make that as round as possible. But something that is a sack filled with feathers is going to be pretty tough to make round. And I would imagine that anybody that was able to get a hold of one of these today would have a pretty tough time shooting par or better. And I don't really know at that point in time if that was really the goal, or maybe golf at that point was just fun and it wasn't super competitive. It was just something for people to go out. It was in Scotland, so they had scotch. So maybe it was something to where they just went out and they wanted to drink with their buddies and, smack a goose feather filled leather sack around for fun. Maybe if they weren't raiding and pillaging or having to fight in a war, which is another interesting point. At one point in Scotland, they actually had a law that it was illegal to play golf because young men needed to go train combat so that they could join the war and the militia. So there was actually a decree that they made it illegal. So that is not what today's podcast episode is about, but maybe a future one I can delve into that. But just an interesting side note that at one point the birthplace of golf had a law where it was illegal to golf. So really kind of interesting. So not only were these incredibly difficult to make, and they only made 4 of them per day for skilled craftsmen. Now, there probably were multiple craftsmen that made these, so there's probably more than just 4 a day that were made total. But they did not last very long. So as you can imagine, if you're smacking something with a stick or a piece of wood, it's not really going to last very long. So these little sacks could maybe last 2 rounds if they were lucky. So today, the way I play golf, a golf ball doesn't make it through usually 9 holes without either getting scuffed up, beat up, or most likely lost, hit in a lake or hit over a fence or something. So my golf balls don't even last 2 rounds. But if they manage to not lose the ball somehow, they are going to basically fall apart, because they're just stitched together. And then if they got wet, which is pretty common occurrence in Scotland, I'd imagine, because it rains all the time, they would start to fall apart. So the stitching, as the leather expands again, if you've ever had wet leather, as soon as it starts to absorb water, it expands a little bit, so the stitching comes out. I'm sure there's probably feathers all over the place, and um, it basically just kind of fell apart. So these flaws in it caused it at some point to be replaced. But if you think about the timeline, it's basically almost 300 years. This is how they played golf. So they played golf with cricket sticks made of wood, and then they ended up having these leather-filled sacks, leather sacks filled with feathers. And so the interesting part about really um, looking at the aspects of golf and how they came around with rules and things of that nature is pretty fascinating. The from the birth of golf in Scotland, there were always sets of rules for it. So as it progressed and it became a much more popular sport, they got conformity rules and how clubs were made and how balls were made. And so basically, once we got to the 1800s, mid 1800s, 1848 to be specific, to the 1890s, we had gut filled balls. So as golf becomes more affordable for a lot more people, and it's not for the ultra rich, and people can afford clubs and they can afford golf balls, they basically discovered the the more modern ball by accident. So the scuffed balls, as they called them, they flew better and they had smooth outside. So it was something to where the dimple, I should say, is something that was an accidental discovery. So they originally had smooth golf balls that they came through all the way up to the 1800s. They tried to make them smooth as possible. They figured things that are around were going to roll better, etc. They found that when the balls ended up getting scuffed, or they had dents in them, or they had scratches in them, they would actually fly straighter, and they would actually fly further. And of course, we know now that has to do a lot with aerodynamics. That has to do with how the dimples in the modern day golf ball cut through the air, how they get lift from them. But at that point in time in 1848, they basically did not, they didn't know those things. So what ended up happening is by hand, they started hand hammering the golf balls. So what they would do is they would have a metal press and they would put a type of design on them that would allow them to have a little bit better aerodynamics and be able to fly through the air. So it's kind of very interesting. This short era, this was probably maybe about 50 years or so. This probably had the largest impact on a golf ball up to the modern age. So up to that point, if you realize they had a piece of wood, then they had, stuffed leather sacks, and then you came to this where it was basically something that had an imprint on it, and it was really the impetus for a lot of game improvements. So once we get into the late 1800s, 1890, there's a gentleman named Coburn Haskell and B.F. Goodrich, who we all know from tire fame and race car fame. They started to have the rubber core of the golf ball. So it was the first time that we had a golf ball that had rubber on the inside. Obviously, rubber is much more springy. You hit it with a big wooden stick, you're going to get some transfer energy, and that's how golf ball ends up flying. So they initially came out with this ball, and they were so used to these other balls that it was originally um, uh, there was resistance to it, so they rejected it. They said that when they would hit them, especially on the greens, they were much too lively, so they would bounce off the putter too fast. It was too tough, so people got used to obviously having to hit the ball pretty hard to be able to get the ball to the hole, and these balls would just jump off of the putter face, and they would be unhappy with the fact that these balls would be so spazzy, I guess you would say, off of the spazzy is not a great word. I probably won't edit that out because I try to do these podcasts as organically as possible. So the word spazzy seems pretty good. So it's pretty spazzy off of the putter, and it was a little bit more uncontrollable than they wanted to. So the interesting part about it is in 1899, one of the U.S. amateurs, he actually won with one of these golf balls, and that kind of changed everything. And then early 1900s, after all a bunch of design experimentation, they used water, steel, lead, glycerin, all types of different cores. I mean, I can't imagine a steel core or a lead core covered in rubber. That would probably not be too good. In 1908, they basically started the first dimple pattern. So they started to use Balata and Sirlin for both pros and amateurs at this point in time. So it was the early 1900s. BF Goodrich really changed the game as far as modern golf, and it really became much more accessible to everybody as people really started to start to play the game in masses, and it became a much more popular sport here in the U.S. So from its humble beginnings in Scotland, once the US really started to get a hold of the game, there were so many more improvements to it and so many more advancements in all of the equipment, not just the golf ball. That's primarily what I'm focusing on today, just because I thought it was pretty interesting, thinking about the humble beginnings of how something, so crazy starts as a piece of wood and turns into what we have it today. So, modern golf balls, there's a zillion of them out there. I think I watched several YouTubers talk about golf balls and they review golf balls. And I want to say there's something like 190 different types of golf balls out there. And they're all manufactured and marketed and targeted towards certain types of golfers. One golf ball is good for somebody with a higher handicap. Another golf ball is only for professionals or somebody that has a low handicap that wants to work the ball. There's all kinds of different marketing things, but the basis of the golf balls really started from early on, and especially the early beginning of 1900 when they came out with a rubber core golf ball. So most of the major manufacturers these days put a lot of money into the not only the research but the science of it, the technology of it, to make sure that the golf balls are not only the same roundness standard, have the same amount of dimples, they have a similar type of flight, and they want to make sure that their golf balls are something that are going to be consistent across every level of their brand. So they definitely have a lot of technology within them. Golf balls for me are something that are very disposable. One of the things that I look for is a little bit of performance, but cost is a big factor to me because I play maybe 2 or 3 rounds a month. And so I'm not somebody that plays, 3 or 4 times a week. So 2 or 3 rounds a month is about what I play. I lose a lot of golf balls. I like to go out and play with my friends and just have a good time. I like to just enjoy the time being out there. You're playing around a golf here in Phoenix. It's 115 degrees outside, and you're the only people on the course. You really look forward to that turn. You get your bratwurst, and you maybe get a beer or something like that. And there's nothing better than that stop at the turn. You get a bratwurst and you get some French fries. One of the things that's really interesting about the turn, and this is totally a side note, is that I usually put ketchup on a bratwurst, but I get ranch and I have to ask for ranch with my French fries. And I started looking up. This is totally a sidebar thing, but I started looking up the popular condiments in the United States, and ranch probably has to be, even though it's not named, I swear it has to be one of the most popular condiments in the country. I know people like ketchup. I've heard like salsa and Tabasco and hot sauce and those, but like I get ranch on everything. So I'll have ranch with French fries. I'll dip my pizza in ranch. And of course, I'll have a salad with ranch. If I have mozzarella sticks, I like a combination. Some I like with marinara sauce, some I like with ranch. There's just all kinds of things, vegetables and ranch. Ranch has to be one of the things that just is um, more popular than anything else. I mean, who nobody puts. Okay, I shouldn't say nobody. Not a lot of people here in the Southwest, anyway, put a lot of relish on their hot dogs. I know that that might be an East Coast thing, so I don't want to offend any of my East Coasters might be listening, but man, if I don't have ranch with like seasoned French fries or things like that, it goes on everything. So anyway, total sidebar combination. So when I hit the 9 holes, it's a great time to get that that one beer, and then you have, a bratwurst or a hot dog, and you have, I do fully load it up with ketchup and mustard and things like that. Maybe some onions if they don't look like they're too squirrely. You got to be careful with some of the courses that I play, that hopefully some of that stuff's pretty fresh. But if I get French fries or something like that, it's got to be ranch. So okay, that's enough rant on the ranch as a condiment. I probably could do a future podcast on just condiments and what is the most popular thing out there. But man, I have to say that ranch dressing has got to be one of the things that's got to be up there. Well, really, in conclusion, though, outside of looking at, golf balls and their impact as far as through history on the game of golf, it's obviously something that you use on every hole. So not every club gets used on every hole, but every hole you do use a golf ball. So it's kind of neat to see, and it was kind of neat to read how a golf ball evolved from this little speck of wood up to what it is today, which is, a multi-billion dollar industry across golf. The advertising dollars and the amount of research that gets put into a golf ball is absolutely amazing. Now there's all kinds of regulations and everything for, the size, the weight, the amount of dimples, that a maximum that it can have, and all those types of things. So they are right now in the golf world, there's a big controversy because a couple of last year, I think it was, the PGA of America ruled that they were going to roll back golf balls, that they've actually made the golf balls fly too far for the professionals, and that's going to roll down to the amateurs as well. So they are regulating it, and they're actually going to roll them back to make them not fly as far, which is really unfortunate for the amateur golfer, I think, because we need all the distance that we can get. Just because the pros, can hit it 380 yards, doesn't mean every amateur can. I certainly can't. So I think that's going to hurt the amateurs. But again, that's just an opinion. So basically, a golf ball is not just a golf ball. When you look at the history of it, it's just like other things throughout history. It is started as something, it evolved over the span of the last, 700 years. If you think of a sport being around for 700 years and the evolution that it came through, um, it's really an ongoing innovation magnet. It is something that is going to continue to evolve. Who knows what it's going to look like in 50 years or 100 years. It could look completely different than it does today. But I thought it'd be a cool thing to talk about this week, as golf is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I just love history. So this is more of the archives part of archives and anchovies. And we did talk a little bit about food, so I got some anchovy food stuff in there as well. But I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. I would like for you to subscribe and follow the podcast. I always have comments open, so please leave comments, give me a like, and I wish you the best of days, the best of weeks, and I can't wait to talk to you next week. Thanks.